Get your ticket for Monerotopia in Mexico City on May 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2023. That's monerotopia.com to get for more info.
Okay.
Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 47. Today's Fountainhead Forum is dedicated to Thomas Jefferson. It's April 13th, and it is his 280th birthday. Happy birthday, Thomas Jefferson. I have Michael Liebowitz on with me. He's involved with the Libertarian Party. He's also very much, I'd also probably say he's objectivist. And he had an interesting take on life because at the age of 47, he just got out of prison after about 25 years.
I'm 46. Don't make me older than I am.
46. Okay. Sorry, Michael. Yeah, this is episode 47, okay. But Michael's 46. So how are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So tell us at least a little bit about how you got into this situation, because it sounds like you spent most of your adult life in jail.
You want to know how I got involved, how I ended up in jail, or how I ended up with
how you ended up in jail that long, how you ended up in jail for all this time. Yeah.
All right. So when I was young, I was quite a hoodlum. I engaged in crimes ranging from theft, vandalism, B&Es to serious assaults. Most of the crimes I committed, like most criminals, I've never been arrested for. But I did compile quite a rap sheet by the time I was 21. And in the end, I ended up with a 33-year sentence, the main charge being conspiracy and accessory to burglary in the first degree, which resulted from I arranged for 3 of my friends to break into the apartment of my ex-girlfriend and beat up and stab her boyfriend. And for that, I received a 27-year sentence that ran what is called consecutive with a separate 6-year sentence that I had.
Wow. So you said you got 4 months ago. Yeah. We often hear that, so this was a 3 strikes you're out situation or something like that, or
you're coming in a little
foggy. Well, was this something like 3 strikes you're out, or you'd had multiple offenses, so that's why you?
No. I happened to be in a court that was in the habit of giving out very long sentences, and so I ended up with a very long sentence. But no, I didn't have a 3 strikes out. It was my first time doing prison time.
It seems like we have a real disparity in sentencing in this country, and just I don't understand why. But this was most of your adult life you ended up in prison. But while you were in there, you discovered Ayn Rand and some other things. Can you tell us a little about that?
It's a long and winding story that's actually pretty interesting. When I was 18 years old, I met a guy who was involved with the Amway business. And for a very short time, I got involved in it. And there was a teaching system that taught how to conduct a successful Amway business. And with that came a reading list. And once I was incarcerated, after a year, maybe 2, I decided that I wanted to do something with my life. I wanted to change my life around. And I remembered that reading list. So I asked the guy who had got me into it if he would send me some of those books, if he would allow me to pay him and he would mail them to me. And he said, sure. So on that list were Free to Choose by Milton Friedman and The Law by Frederick Bastiat. So I read those 2 books, and that was the beginning of my free market odyssey. And the inside of the book, on the back of the book, the law, was an address for the Foundation for Economic Education. So I wrote to the Foundation for Economic Education, and they sent me a 1-year subscription for free for their magazine, Ideas on Liberty. Inside the magazine, Ideas on Liberty, was an address for a bookstore called Laissez-Faire Books. So I started to order books from them. I read a book. I don't think I got it from Laissez-Faire, but I got them somewhere. It was called The Triumph of Liberty by Jim Powell. And it was 64 mini biographies of people that have strongly influenced liberty. One of them was Ayn Rand. And the story he told about how the book came to be written, the impact of the book, it really intrigued me. So I ordered it as part of a box set. I think the box set included Atlas Shrugged, Human Action, Our Enemy the State by Albert J. Nock, Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder Lane, and maybe one other book that I can't remember. But I read Atlas
Was it
Shrugged.
Isabel Patterson's God of the Machine?
I don't think so. I've read that, but I believe I read it separately.
Yeah.
It might have been. And this is, we're going back to 2001, 2002. But once I read Atlas, I became hooked, and I just devoured her fiction, nonfiction, everything I could, as well as, an abundance of Austrian economics and other great libertarian thinkers. But she definitely had the strongest impact upon me.
Yeah, the laissez-faire books used to have some great stuff. I mean, they were separate. When about was this when you got a hold of these the laissez-faire books blog?
The fee I got in touch with in 2000, but I didn't actually start ordering from laissez-faire until 2002. And then, of course, I think they were bought out in 07 or 08. But a friend of mine and I, my best friend, we used to just wait every month for the laissez-faire catalog, and we would sit down and drink coffee and browse it and just look for stuff to read. They just had a great selection.
Oh yeah, laissez-faire books had a lot of good stuff in their days. It was a good place to go. Yeah, that was I remember getting it before there were websites. So, yeah, it was something that came out monthly, and they would.
Yeah,
and there was a lot of there. I think I probably had as much as anything there. So then that was how you got into. So the first book by Ayn Rand you read was
Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah,
actually, before that, I read a book called The Philosophical Thought of Ayn Rand by Douglas. It was edited by Douglas Rasmussen and Douglas Daniel. But I read a critique of Rand before ever reading Rand, which is not something I would recommend, but it was nonetheless the order in which I read them.
How easy or difficult is it to get books when you're in prison? I mean, I assume they probably want you to get books because at least it keeps you occupied, but you still got to order them and you got to receive them. And I suppose they search all your packages when you get them.
It is. And it's a pain. You have to, if somebody sends them to you, it's actually a lot easier in Connecticut. I don't know about anywhere else, but order books, you've got to get what's called you get a money slip, and then you've got to have a counselor sign it. And then it takes time for it to get approved. And then it goes out, and then the books come in and they have to get inspected and searched. And the longer I was in prison, actually, the harder it got to order books, because there was some guy in Connecticut. There was these guys, and they attacked and murdered a family. And in part, it was blamed, or I don't know, but there was a suggestion that they were influenced by Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood. It was said that they had read that during a previous sentence. So after that, they really started cracking down on books. I forget what it was called, the review board of some sort would have to check the books and go over them. And interestingly, they used to put out a list of books that were approved and not approved. And after all that, when the list came out, one of the books that was approved was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. So the book that actually caused the problem, they didn't even ban. So it was really, really strange.
Yeah, it does sound strange. I guess the easiest way to probably get books is if you have family or friend get them for you and then bring them to you.
Yes. And you can't get used books either. So that complicates things. Makes it certainly more expensive.
Oh, you can't get used books. Wow.
No. I don't. If I had to guess,
you can't go to half price books or go to used bookstores. Yeah.
No, you have to get it from a bookstore, and it has to be new. I guess they're afraid that you're going to have contraband smuggled in, maybe sewn into the paper, some such thing.
Yeah. I totally get that. That's rather interesting how that works out, though. So you discovered all this fairly soon after you went in? Is that what you're saying?
I had been in, when I first read Ayn Rand, I had been in about 4 years.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, relative to the 25 years I spent, yeah, I suppose it was soon.
Yeah. So what did you do after that? It sounds like you started on a junior, but obviously couldn't really do anything with it because you were in prison in Connecticut, I assume?
Yes, I just kept reading and reading and reading. And I had a cellmate. Well, first we were just best friends, and then we ended up cellmates for 11 years. And he and I, we got into a lot of good things. We designed a program that we ran in the prison, and then we ended up writing a book that criticized the prison system. So we definitely put our knowledge to good use, for sure.
Yeah. So how do you write a book while you're in prison?
Well, in my case, you have a friend that loves to write because I actually did very little of the actual writing.
Okay.
I call myself more of a helper. He insisted I be listed as a
Mhm.
co-author, but he just was doggedly writing, sometimes 12 hours a day. We did a lot of research. I had a lot of note taking, a lot of proofreading, a lot of arguing about what concepts meant, what belonged in the book, what didn't belong in the book. And he found the
Mhm.
typist. We ultimately, with the aid of some friends and family, got the book self-published, and we were on our way.
So this friend is outside prison, obviously.
No, no, he's in prison. He was my cellmate for
He's in
11
prison.
years.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But somehow you managed to get all of this to the typist.
Yes.
So
We
so
we had
you
to
you
mail
gave
it out,
something.
and then
So you
yeah, we would mail the rough manuscript to the typist, then she would type it, send it back, we'd proofread, and it had to come in and out a lot of times. And that ultimately is what drew the attention of the authorities to it, because they ended up intercepting it coming in, and they really wanted to put us in, well, the box, but segregation. They wanted to put us in segregation and threaten us. I know this because the captain told my co-author, and the legal department just told them, no, there's really nothing you can do about it. You have to let them write this book. You can't stop it. They have a First Amendment right to do so. And so we
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah. So this went back and forth, all using snail mail, and
Yes.
you don't have access to it. Do you even have access to anything like a typewriter or any computers when in prison, or is everything just written down
There
in
in the
notepads?
block I was in, there's one typewriter, and you
Yeah.
have 90 something guys in the unit. Not all of them use the typewriter, but enough do. And with a limited amount of time out of the cell, there's just no way we would have ever accomplished anything that way.
Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, that's very interesting. Just wondering, what movies do you think portray prison life accurately? I first want to ask about Shawshank Redemption, but
I've
what
never
is there anything
seen
that
I've
accurately?
never seen a movie or read a book that presented prison life accurately. It's just
Okay.
I mean, prison life ultimately is like Groundhog Day. It's the same thing every day. It's boring. It's monotonous. There's not nearly as much violence or predation as the movie would lead us to believe. Now, that said, I've only been in prison in Connecticut, so I really can't speak of other prisons, but I don't think that human nature is that different as you move across state lines. I think that criminals are criminals and prison is prison, but I ultimately don't know.
Well, yeah, and you realize you're all in the same boat, and you all have to make the best of it. So there's no point in, and you've got time in a way. It's
Yeah.
almost like your time is unlimited, really, and you just so maybe you don't value it as much because you're going to be there for a long time.
It's a very when you're doing a large sentence, I don't know what it's like to do a short sentence, but when you're doing a large sentence, it just becomes your life. Like, you're not thinking about, okay, I have to plan to go home in a couple months or a year or so. You just do your day-to-day life. It becomes your existence. So I had a couple of friends, and we would read together, debate together, drink coffee together, and grow together. And that's just what we did. And for a lot of years. And then suddenly it was time to go. And I'm happy it was, because that's not something I ever want to
Yeah.
experience again, nor would I recommend it.
Yeah, certainly, and it does sound like also that maybe one thing that happens is a lot of prisoners have trouble adjusting to the real world once because they've been there for so long.
Um,
Uh,
I
is that
I don't know
true,
about
or,
that.
or
Uh, Certainly, I mean, whenever you're separated from an environment, there's culture shock. Whether you're going into prison, coming out of prison, going to another country, whatever. So I'm not going to dismiss that idea. The problem is in prison, everything, how do I say it? Everybody has things provided to them. So we're not responsible really for anything. You're shot, you don't have to pay a water bill. You can take a shower. Your clothes are done for you for the most part. You washed, your electricity's paid for, your meals are provided, medical, you just write a request, you go. So you don't really have much chance to learn how to be responsible. And when you add that to the fact
yeah,
that accountability is at a premium in prison. You know, inmates aren't really held accountable for their misbehavior unless it's extreme. So, you know, if you go say 20 years and you spend your life watching Jerry Springer, slamming dominoes and arguing about sports, and then get released into society and someone says, oh, look, you know, they're just not ready. Well, they haven't done much to prepare themselves, nor has the Department of Correction done much to prepare them.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got all this time too. You know, wondering versus say, you know, when you go in, you have this snapshot of what society looks like. And then when you come out, you get this new snapshot of what society looks like. What were the most shocking changes from the day you went in and the day you got out? What were you like, I can't believe this is so much kind of thing?
The problem is I was watching television and listening to the radio the whole time, reading magazines and books. So I knew all of the changes. I had heard about people walking around staring at their phones, that sort of thing. I, of course, thought that I would be above that. And I thought, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to be one of these jerks walking around staring at a phone. And not long after I was out, I went to my niece's, they had her like a recital or something, you know, a concert they put on at the school. And when we left, I was walking down the street with my sister, and I'm there looking at my phone, reading emails, texts. And then I realized, okay, I'm now that guy. So it kind of surprised me, I guess, how quickly I turned into one of the people that I would see on television and think was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, you know, did you recognize your friends? I mean, you know, because considering how much well, if you saw them anyway, but like, you know, you'd say, wow, I can't believe you changed so much. You don't look.
Yes, that I'm glad you mentioned that, because I would have forgot about it. Yes, when I met people my age, because to me, I'm so connected to my high school years, for instance, that it just seems like yesterday, because not much transpired in the meantime. I mean, I did the same thing every day. So I'm very connected to that. So I don't feel like a 46-year-old, whatever that means. But when I went and saw some people that I knew, they just seemed so adult. You know, they're married, they have kids, they're paying bills, they're working, whatever. And it just seemed that was bizarre. Definitely was bizarre.
I can imagine that. And it is interesting when you watch, because some people really do make profound changes in those days. You know, I got to know, you know, once you get in prison and let's say you go out to a bar and say, hi, sweetie, I just got out of prison. I haven't. What does that work, or how do women react?
I haven't had to. I actually haven't had to try it. I have a girlfriend, so I haven't done that.
Yeah.
But I have had a lot of fun telling people that I just spent 25 years in prison for shock value. It's just yesterday I went for a medical procedure, and I was talking about the podcast that I do, and they said, well, the doctor asked me, well, what prepares you for that? What makes you, be able to host your own podcast? And I said, well, 25 years in prison and a lot of reading. And he had no idea that I had spent 25 years in prison. So everybody got quiet suddenly. And I've had that experience quite a bit, and it's fun.
Yeah. I can imagine was your girlfriend, was she one of those prison pen pals that you sometimes?
No, not at all. No, I've known her whole family since before I could even walk. And I knew her for a couple decades before we started communicating. And, she wrote to me, and we ended up bonding, and, it's worked out well. We get along great, but no, I would never get involved in something like that. Like, I'm not looking for the type of woman that's scouring the internet looking for felons to write to. That's definitely not my thing.
I think it's, the ultimate, it's like the whole bad thing, but yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And also it's kind of a safe relationship because you don't really have to do anything because they can't come out. But yeah,
I was never into that. A lot of guys were looking, the prison pen pals and stuff. I never got into that. I had no interest in engaging in such a thing ever.
Well, I don't know. And I suppose too, if you're, I don't know if you're like your girlfriend sent a nude photo or something like that, they might get them or something like that, but it's probably something.
Well, if you're a guy in prison and you want your girl to send you nude photos, scumbag is the word that comes to mind. I think that's just grotesque that anybody would do that. If you respect somebody and love somebody, you would ever ask them to do such a thing.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, and I suppose in prison something like that would probably get appropriated quickly too. Hey guys, let's
Well, it
pass.
would. It would, but I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about guards looking at these photos. It's just
Oh
degrading and
yeah.
demeaning, and nothing I would ever want to do. And if
Yeah.
I had a
Well,
girlfriend that would do such a thing, she wouldn't be my girlfriend for long.
yeah. So let's get back to the book. What did you specifically say in the book that about prison life, or what was in this book? And how
Wow.
well is this book sold?
We've given away more than we've actually sold. We didn't write the book to become famous or to become rich. We did it to make a difference. And it certainly has opened a lot of doors. I don't think I'd be having this discussion with you if it weren't for the book. I mean, it ultimately got me a spot on a radio show. It's got me multiple interviews with various media outlets. But what we talked about, we laid out an integrated approach and an integrated explanation for why the correctional system fails. We started out by explaining what exactly a criminal is, and we based our idea of what a criminal is both on our introspection, personal experience with other criminals, and reading about criminals, specifically in the works of Dr. Stanton Samanow and Dr. Samuel Yolkelson. They wrote a 3-volume set called The Criminal Personality, and Dr. Samanow later wrote a book called Inside the Criminal Mind. Reading this stuff was like reading a veritable blueprint to how we thought. I mean, they knew exactly what they were talking about. So what we wanted to do when we wrote the book was put that out there so that the public would understand what exactly it is that they're expecting the Department of Correction to deal with, what you're trying to fix. You're not talking about somebody that just one day committed a crime and was otherwise a responsible citizen. You're talking about people who are habitually irresponsible and habitual rights violators, people with very little, if any, empathy, who feel entitled to the max to do whatever they want to do to get whatever they want. And so the doctors, they put out 52 thinking errors, and we included, I think, 10 of them, or maybe 8, I don't remember exactly, in our book, just to give a brief explanation of it. So once we did that, we then explained the day-to-day operations of the prison. For instance, the rules are that we figured out, we went through the handbook and figured out that a third of the rules are never enforced. So why have them? There's very little reason to have them
Yeah.
if you don't need to enforce them. And even the other rules are very inconsistent in their enforcement. So if you're trying to change somebody's behavior, as any parent knows, you have to be consistent. Otherwise, there's no lesson learned because you can't attach a specific behavior to a specific outcome. So if you're doing good and being penalized for it half the time, and you're doing bad and being rewarded for it half the time, there's no way to know or to have any type of behavior reinforced. And the example I always like to give, because I think people can grasp it pretty easily, of good behavior being rewarded and bad behavior of good behavior being punished and bad behavior being rewarded. We used to come back from work. So when you come back from work, you're supposed to get on a shower list so that when your tier is not out, they let you out like a line and you get your shower. So my cellmate and I were the only 2 people that actually got on the list. Everybody else just stayed out when they weren't supposed to. But instead of getting written up or in trouble or sent to the back of the line, they just got their shower ahead of us. So we did what we were supposed to and ended up showering last, or in some cases not getting a shower at all, whereas the guys who break the rules get their shower on time. And when you figure that iterated, that type of thing over a course of decades, you can imagine the impact that it's having on people.
Yeah. It just tells you that there really aren't any rules at all per se. It is definitely a problem.
There is retaliation.
You know,
Now, if a CO doesn't like you,
yeah.
then they might enforce a rule and then you're screwed. So you could do something that you've been doing for years that nobody cares about, and all of a sudden somebody doesn't like you or somebody just has a pet peeve, and now you're hit.
Yeah, I can see exactly. Yeah, people do that with a lot of rules everywhere, not just in prison. Unfortunately, we never enforce this rule, but we're going to enforce it now because we don't like you.
Sure, it's a common thing. The problem is, while it may be common, is most places and most organizations aren't tasked with fixing the problem of criminality. The Department of Correction is. That's what they're paid to do, and that's what they claim to do. So while others may do it, other organizations might do it, it's not the same animal as when the Department of Correction does it.
Yeah. One question I inevitably ask too when I hear about guys in prison, what percentage of these guys barely had a father in their lives?
I don't know from asking guys, but from what I've read, it's a very common thing for guys in prison to not have had a father in their lives. Now,
Yeah, or
you know,
some strong male figure, be
the
it if not a
problem,
father, an uncle or a grandfather.
yes, the problem with that sort of reasoning though is because normally if somebody doesn't have a father in their life, there's a lot of other circumstances going on as well. It's not as if the guys in prison had a responsible mother who is working her ass off to pay the bills and send the kid to private school while the father's absent. You have an absent father, a mother maybe has three other kids by two different fathers. You're living in a drug infested neighborhood.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of things going on. And by the way, I'm not saying any of that is an excuse for criminal behavior, because most people growing up in those
yeah.
circumstances don't become criminals.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? What do you think leads most criminals to ending up in prison? I mean, well, first, but other than the fact that they get caught, of course, because it sounds like a lot of criminals don't even get caught. But
It ultimately comes down to thinking patterns and values. What does the person value? And I mean, if you're reasoning a reasoning human being and you're trying to figure out what's best for you, you're going to realize sooner or later that violating people's rights, breaking into cars, shooting people, selling drugs, whatever, are not going to benefit you long term. Very few, if no criminals actually engage in such an analysis. It's more of an immediate gratification. I want what I want when I want it. And
yeah,
where does that impetus come from? I ultimately don't know. I do know that there's the potential to change it if the individual will actually engage in the effort to think and to figure things out. But criminals just don't do that.
certainly, yeah. There's a yeah. What? So how did you get yourself out? Back from a point where you how did you reform yourself when you were in there? And
Well, there's a few things that differentiate my experience from others. One is most criminals, most guys in prison. If you look at two IQ types, you have verbal IQ and performance IQ, right? So most
yeah,
guys in prison have their performance IQ is fine, but verbal IQ is very low. I'm the reverse. I have a performance learning disability, but my verbal IQ is very high. So that helps me when it comes to reading, comprehension, integrating information, learning lessons, whereas other guys in prison would have a far more difficult time with that. Secondly, I had a friend with me who decided to change his behavior right at the same time. So for over a course of 15 plus years, I had a guy with me that was on the same path, willing to hold me accountable, willing to be held
yeah,
accountable, who was reading the same books, learning the same lessons. And when you have somebody like that, it makes it first of all, it makes it far easier to learn. Secondly, it makes it
yeah,
far easier to put aside the criticisms of other inmates, of staff who are telling you you're wasting your time, or what are you trying to be, a goody two shoes now? So to have that kind of support, most people simply don't have in prison. And third, I like to read. So the fact that I like to read exposed me to a lot of different information and a lot of different ideas that helped me to grow and ultimately to reform myself.
so it sounds like to me, and I suspect a lot of prisoners don't find a buddy like that. I mean, it's like you go to the gym, work out together, something like that. You're kind of there for each other, and it does help you keep your eye on the prize, so to speak.
Well, that happens, sure. I mean, there's guys in prison that become pals and buddies. But in my case, my buddy
Yeah,
happened to be somebody that was he wanted to improve himself, wanted to become a man of integrity, was interested in reading, was interested in being the best that he possibly could. That's a rare thing to find in prison. And it's also a rare thing that you would be in the same block with somebody for 15 years and in the same cell for 11. So there were a lot of circumstances that made
yeah,
our friendship different than what most guys in prison are able to have.
yeah. That's true. Is it after a while, is it possible to pick your cellmate, or is that just all done at random?
You Yeah, yes and no. Yeah, yes, you can to an extent find the guy if you have an open cell. Like if I've got a cellmate and he moves and I have an open cell, I normally can talk to a counselor and get somebody that I want. But then there's times when they'll say, "Oh no, we don't do convenience moves." And you can point out, "Wait a second, I just saw you do 6 last week."
Yeah.
No, 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 we don't do that. So yes, you can get it done, but it's not as if it's an automatic thing where, okay, you have an open room or you are living with someone you don't get along with, so you go find the guy you can and it gets done. It does happen, but it's not automatic.
How often does that happen? You just have two cellmates who hate each other.
All the time. I mean, you're talking
I
about
think
putting
that,
two
yeah.
sociopaths in an 8x12 cage together. I mean, you can imagine what you're going to end up with.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose you even have one person on the top bunk and one person on the lower bunk, or
Yes, and you know, maybe the guy on the top bunk rolls around too much, and that becomes a problem. I mean, there's all types of issues that arise between guys living in a cell together. I mean, if you took two well-adjusted citizens, you could take a man and a wife and put them in a cell together, and they're going to get on each other's nerves for sure. But when you take two strangers and put them in a room together, both with very fragile
yeah.
egos, and neither with any interest in respecting the rights of others, and you're just courting disaster.
I can just imagine that. Yeah, definitely, definitely not something you ever really want to experience. So you found somebody, and you're lucky that this. So what do you think really influenced you and helped, you know, put you on a path to a better way? You read Ayn Rand. Were there any other books, any other things you heard or
Oh,
read?
sure, sure. I mean, the Stanton Samanows inside the Criminal Mind and the Criminal Personality were immensely helpful. And these guys, they talked about how in order to change, you cannot allow a criminal even one failing. Like you need total integrity. You can't have one lie. You've got to be a perfectionist. And so that's what we did. I mean, it's not that we met the standard of perfection, but that's how we judged our behavior. So anytime there's a slip, there's an
Yeah,
immediate course correction. And in learning what the thinking errors were that we needed to fix from the criminal personality was also immensely helpful. But there's other stuff as well. I mean, Aaron Beck's book, The Cognitive Basis of Anger, Hostility, and Violence, was an excellent book on why people become angry, how not to become angry. That was immensely helpful. Nathaniel Branden's
yeah,
book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, because then we learn, okay, I'm very weak. I have a very poor self-image. And this is why I often fly off the handle, because anytime somebody offers me any resistance, I take it as a personal sort of destruction of my ego. And what happens when you feel that way is you lash out. And so that book was also tremendously helpful. And there's hundreds more. But it's interesting that you asked
yeah.
that, because just this morning I put out on Facebook the 5 books I thought influenced me the most. And Atlas Shrugged, Inside the Criminal Mind, and Nathaniel Branden's Psychology of Self-Esteem are all in my top 5.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people in the Libertarian Party ought to read that book, Psychology of Self-Esteem,
I
because
think it's a
you
great
definitely
book.
people
I
would
think
be.
I think I think it's very controversial to it's interesting to me because a lot of objectivists really hate Nathaniel Branden because of his, what happened with Ayn Rand. But I really don't care about what his personality was or his character flaws were.
Yeah,
It doesn't interest me. The book was helpful, and that's all I really care about.
my perspective on Nathaniel Branden has changed certainly. Back in my 20s, it was like, look at all these people who read Nathaniel Branden, they're crazy, and now it's like, look at all these people who really read Nathaniel Branden, they've really accomplished some things. you know, yeah, it's a yeah, but I find that story very believable, but I don't think it really matters all that much whether or not actions don't invalidate ideas. I don't understand why there's this whole attitude. It's like, oh, I found out Albert Einstein kicks his dog, so that means the theory of relativity goes out the door.
Yes, I'm with you.
The
That's
theory is right
exactly
or
my
wrong its
point.
own merit.
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with the fact whether he kicks his dog.
Yeah, I'm not hanging out with the guy either way.
I don't think he did kick his dog. It's but there seems to be. I'm becoming more and more amazed by stuff like that in among people, that they'll throw ideas just because they find out something negative about the person.
That's something that has kind of struck me too. Going back to an earlier question of yours, is the lack of civil discourse. That a lot of people seem to think that an insult is a refutation of an argument. So if I make a point and then somebody says to me, "Oh, but you were in prison." Okay, if I tell you 2 + 2 = 4, would you say, "Well, I'm not going to believe you because you were in prison"? It's stupid. Yeah, I was an awful person. You can believe I've changed or not believe I've changed. But if I tell you it's raining out, if I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's irrelevant who I was in the past or who I am now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's rather. I really worry about the decline of debate and discussion among people. And since you've been, and it's interesting too. I mean, you've just been out. When did you have? You don't really have internet access in prison, do you? So you can't get on message boards. Get on.
No. And even though I'd heard about it, it's still a bit of it.
Still watch regular TV though.
Yes.
I mean, you can still probably watch the World Series and watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But and I now and then you get movies in there too.
Yeah.
Right?
But the social media, it's been a shock to me just how vitriolic it can become and how quickly that people just resort to. And I get it. I think in large part that's because of the distance. I mean, there's a few things. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Godfather, but Michael Corleone.
I've actually not seen The Godfather.
Wow.
Well,
Michael Corleone wants to commit the murder to kill the guy that tried to kill his father, and he's got to do it up close. Now, he had previously been in the military, and his brother tells him, this isn't you shoot somebody from a mile away. You've got to get up close to him and get blood all over yourself, because he knew, like we all know, that there's a big difference. And I think there's a big difference between having a face-to-face discussion with somebody when you realize you're talking to a flesh and blood human being with, emotions, feelings, goals, aspirations, and when somebody's just words being typed across a screen, and you can say whatever you want. Who knows if that's even your real name that's on your, your Facebook page or your Twitter profile or what. So people do that stuff. In prison, we used to call those types of people cell gangsters. They're people that when the doors are locked, they scream out of the door, they issue threats, call names and whatever. But when the doors are open, they don't say anything. And that's, I guess, out here, those guys are called, or women are called, keyboard warriors. I just heard that term for the first time the other day. I found it humorous.
Yeah, keyboard warriors has two meanings. Yeah, you have people who do that, but you also have. Also, it can refer to people who, for example, at least politically, who are very pro-war but aren't willing to, like a 22-year-old is saying, "Yeah, I think we should bomb these countries, do this and that." It's like, well, okay, sign and go,
Yeah.
But they don't do that. Or sometimes they call them laptop bombardiers. That's another term. I know what you mean by keyboard warriors. And there's a lot of people, unfortunately, there are a lot of people nowadays too who will talk about things, but they won't, do anything. And even unfortunately, we see that among Ayn Rand. I call these people Ayn Rand masturbators. They read Ayn Rand, talk about how much they love Ayn Rand, but really don't make any application of that to their belief systems. And the person who's at the top of that list, of course, is Alan Greenspan. But I would also apply it probably to Paul Ryan, and I would also apply it not politics, but to Mark Cuban. I mean, Mark Cuban says he loves Ayn Rand, but he's never done anything to advocate for free market, for laissez-faire capitalism.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I like one of the most interesting things I've seen. I've read it in prison. A lot of people say that their two biggest influences are Ayn Rand and the Bible, and I don't know how that's even fits into the mind of the same person. I don't know how they square that circle, but that's their problem, not mine.
Well, the Bible is ultimately a lot of different stories. It's stories about Job, stories about Joseph, stories about Elijah, stories about. The Bible is just all these different characters and all these things that happen to people, and the moral lessons that you get from the Bible.
Well, take the example of Job and contrast it with any of Ayn Rand's heroes. You're talking about somebody here that is,
Oh yeah,
suffers immense torture, is incredibly self-sacrificial in the name of faith in a God. You have a malevolent being that's, doing this stuff to him in order to impress another malevolent being. I mean,
yeah.
that's just that story alone. You contrast it with, in the name of the best within us, or, I swear by my life and my love
Oh
of
yeah,
it, never to live for another man. And it's just, the two don't
yeah.
fit.
Oh yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Were there any books or anything like that that are popular with prisoners?
Any popular books in prison?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Any popular books in prison? Yeah, you mentioned.
Um, a lot of guys like the 48 Laws of Power because they see
Okay.
the sort of
Yeah,
manipulation that's involved in the book, and it sort of fits in with their own
Robert Greene. Yes.
self-image, and it's validating. Oh, see, yes, this
Yeah.
is what you have to do. Then it depends too. Like, with the black Muslims in prison, you'll find a lot of Elijah Muhammad or Louis Farrakhan stuff is popular. Or,
Oh,
some guys, you have
yeah.
self-improvement stuff is popular, or it depends. But yeah, there's stuff in prison that's popular. There's very rarely something that is popular with all crowds, but within each
Yeah.
segment, stuff that's popular.
Do you see a lot of conversion that happens in prison? You certainly hear a lot about men leading prison ministries, stuff like that. That happen where
Um,
some guys go to and they find Jesus, or they maybe find Mohammed, or
yes, it happens a lot. Unfortunately, from my own experience and from a lot of studying, it very rarely leads to actual behavior change, and for good reason. Ultimately, religions don't diagnose the problem. They don't they're not addressing the criminal thinking patterns
yeah,
that need to be addressed. So a person who finds the Bible
yeah,
may have every intention on doing what's right, but he doesn't even realize that he's doing wrong. And I'll say the same thing for myself. Had I just read Ayn Rand and never came across Dr. Samanow, I would probably suffer from the same problems, not realizing when I'm actually violating my integrity, when I'm doing things that are against my own interest. For me, Dr. Samanow provided something to know when I'm screwing up. I mean, it's similar, like most people can eat, some sugar. A diabetic probably should avoid it. But unless he knows he's a
yeah,
diabetic, he won't know to avoid the sugar.
yeah, yeah. And that's. I think sometimes people just need something to give them something to shoot for, and it's and often ritual is an important part of it, because Christian church always has its ritual. You go to church once a week, and or some places they get out and they go to their AA meetings. Did a lot of the uh, how percentage of prisoners were in your opinion were there because of truly violent crimes, and what percentage of prisoners were there, you'd say, because of really nonviolent crimes, and really probably shouldn't have, victimless crimes that probably shouldn't have been there? What percentage would you say that's?
Well, the problem is I was in a level 4 facility where guys are doing, 20, 30, 40 life sentences. So
Okay.
most of those guys are in for violent offenses. I've never been in a lower level facility. The closest I came, I was in a level 3 facility. But even the level 3 facility I was in was a higher security level 3. So most of the guys there are at the very
Yeah.
least in for domestic violence. But I think if it's
Yeah.
one, it's too many. I think there's far too many people that are in prison for crimes that are not for violating the rights of anybody else. If you're selling drugs, you're doing drugs. These are transactions among adults, assuming they're adults. And like it or not, they ought to have the right to do so. The reason they end up harming everybody around them is because the stuff's illegal. If it's not illegal, you don't have the same
Yeah.
problems that we have now.
Yeah. Yeah. So what since I just saw the documentary I've got to ask, what do you think about Julian Assange?
What I know about him, and it's very little, so I'm not. I don't like to put out a full-fledged opinion on it. But from what I know, I don't see how he's not protected by the First Amendment. I mean, if he's releasing documents, if he's releasing stuff that has come across his way, and he is not, it's not like he's breaking into the Pentagon to steal secrets, or breaking into Langley to
Yeah,
steal secrets. This stuff is coming across his desk.
yeah,
And I don't see why he's being held to a different standard. I think that the idea seems to be that there's this assumption that media organizations owe the government something. And I think that's a dangerous, dangerous idea, if
oh yeah,
indeed I'm right about
yeah,
what's happening there.
yeah. Well, it also sounds like there's a lot of other things going on. I mean, are there any prison practices that you definitely think should be done away with? I mean, do you consider solitary confinement to be torture, for example?
No, I don't. I think that the way that it's implemented is problematic, because you'll often have guys going to seg because the guards don't like him, and it's used more as a weapon than as
Yeah,
a device to keep people, from harming others. But ultimately, if you have an inmate that simply refuses to comply, and he's going to be a harm to other people in the population, I mean, what are you going to do to him? You're just going to say, no, we
yeah,
can't put him in seg, just leave him to run around with everybody else. I don't see that as viable. Plus, if I know that there's no real consequence to fighting or to hurting somebody, other than, I mean, if I'm not going to go to the box, then what are they going to do to me? And so I think that it's probably
yeah,
used too much, but no, I don't think they should abolish it.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't really know. Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't, but as we pointed out, it does seem like it, and there's tremendous abuse to weaponize these things. I think that's
Yes.
definitely a problem. I don't know. Yeah, I don't. Maybe just, I don't know, make these guys run laps or something like that if they're being bad. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, uh, do you have who is one thing that I'm curious about in prison? Who gets to the top of the social hierarchy, and who usually ends up on the bottom? I'm very
Well,
curious about that.
I've only now before a few years before I went to prison, there was a big gang problem in Connecticut. So in those environments, you
Yeah,
have that type of thing. But I've really only ever come across one person in prison that I would think would be at the top of the hierarchy. And that's because he didn't really care what you did to him. He wouldn't care if you put him in segregation. He didn't care what happened. So
yeah,
he would fight with, inmates, correctional officers, lieutenants, whomever. But in general, I've never really witnessed that sort of hierarchy that you're talking about, or that you see on television, where one guy runs the prison and everybody sort of listens to what he's saying or
yeah.
dictating. I've never really encountered that.
Oh yeah. Well, it might just be kind of guy that everybody kind of looks up to. I mean, like in the case of Andy Dufresne and Shawshank Redemption, I think it got to a point where a lot of the prisoners looked up to Andy, or you have somebody who's on the bottom who just everybody hates. That's another thing.
Well,
Or
you do have
because
guys, like, for instance, you might have a guy that knows a lot about the law, and a lot of guys will
yeah,
congregate around him to get advice about the law. Or you might have a guy who knows a lot about a given religion, so the guys sort of will flock to him. But that's a far cry from having a guy in the block that everybody migrates towards or looks up to.
yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, I understand. Yeah. So what where so yeah, so what else has influenced you besides you mentioned Salmon. Now it's not, do you think everybody should read Salmon, or do you think that's just valuable for prisoners? I mean, is there something who's ever been to
I
prison can learn
think
from that?
I think anybody I think that anybody can learn from it. I think that there's far too little concern with what goes on in prisons and how prisons run. And the reason is because I think most people think, well, they're just prisoners. Who cares what happens to them? That, whatever. I don't, that's fine. But 95% of the prison population is being released, and they're being released into your communities. So it seems to me that if you're a citizen of this country, you want guys who are coming out of prison to have learned their lesson and not be going back to prison. You want them to get the experience that, by the way, your tax dollars are paying for. You're paying supposedly to rehabilitate these guys. So, given that you're already being charged for it, and given that the guys are coming back into your community, it seems you ought to take an interest in this. It's a hard, it's a hard argument because most people just don't seem to care, in my experience anyway. But I certainly think that people should read Samenow because he gives the best description of inmates or criminals I've ever read. And he also offers recommendations on how to deal with criminals. And there's an abundance of other information out there as well about evidence-based programming, what works to rehabilitate offenders, what programs, what type of environment, what type of staff behaviors. I mean, that's all out there. If you just Google evidence-based practices and corrections, you could be reading for the rest of your life.
What type of reforms do you think would you like to implement if you're the big warden of all American prisons tomorrow? What changes would you make?
I think well, I mean, there's a few aspects to this question, but if I can just wave a magic wand, if that's what you're asking me, and the prisons are going to operate that I want them to operate, I think that you need to have rules that make sense, that are actually implemented for the safety and security of the institution and to teach criminals not to be criminals. I think they need to be consistently enforced. I think guys should be I think privileges should be earned. Guys should be rewarded for good behavior, punished for bad behavior, so that the right things are being incentivized. And you need to have a regime of evidence-based programming and practices, which there's plenty of evidence as to the type of programs that work to rehabilitate offenders. In essence, they're cognitive behavioral therapies addressed to what they call criminogenic needs, or what the doctors called criminal thinking errors. They're not the same exactly, but they are very similar. And if you could do that, you could get some success. The problem is there's one huge obstacle to that, at least in Connecticut, and I'm sure in a lot of other correctional institutions, and that is that they're unionized. So any changes you're going to try to put into play are going to be resisted by guys from the union. And they also know that there's no consequence to not implementing them in practice, because if you put the policy in, they don't do it, what's going to happen to them? You're not going to fire them. The union's going to protect them.
How much do prison guards try to exploit their situation, or do they exploit their situation? I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, they're in this place where they obviously have a lot of power over people. I mean,
yes,
you do sometimes hear, for example, about male prison guards trying to, get favors from female prisoners and things like that.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me. But I'm obviously in male facilities, and in my experience, correctional officers are far more indifferent than they are malevolent. I mean, it happens. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not saying there's not corruption and there's not sadistic COs. But to be fair, there's also a lot of COs that I found to be very nice guys. My criticism of correctional officers is never that they're mean or that they're nasty human beings. It's that they're indifferent and they, just don't care to get good results out of their job, whether it be because they entered it that way or because any ambition has been just drained out of them by the system.
Basically, they're bureaucrats.
Yes,
that's the way to put it.
Yes,
like anybody else. I mean, I definitely think getting rid of the unions is one solution. It's
I think it's a must. I don't know how else you fix it. I can't. I mean, it's possible. I mean, obviously, I'm not omniscient. I can't see every possibility, but until they're not unionized, I don't see how you can ever implement the type of reforms that would actually make a difference.
How have you adjusted since you got out? What have you done? I mean,
well,
go out to your favorite pizza place or something.
Sure. Well, I've been very fortunate. I've got a good friend. We've been friends since I was 14 years old and he was 16, and he allows me to live in his house. So I don't have a lot of the challenges that, quite frankly, most people leaving prisons have. And given that, I've been able to, I came out of here and I had a goal. My goal is to be a talk show host, and I've got my own podcast up and running now. I've been on numerous podcasts, numerous radio programs. So that's going well. And I've also gotten to be the spokesperson for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut, which is something good. I mean, it's something that I'd like to do because I'm ultimately trying to spread the liberty message and get more and more people on board with the importance of having a free society, and any role that I
Yeah.
can play, in that vein is great for me. So I feel I've adjusted very well. I mean, I'm not going to say there's been no hiccups. When I first got out, around the holidays, being around so many people was a bit overwhelming for me. The social atmosphere was tough, but for the most part, I feel I'm adjusting well. I love being free and I'm loving life.
So, so as a, I'm curious, I mean, what happens, when you say go out for a job interview or try to get your apartment or something like that? I mean,
Well, I haven't had to try to go out to get an
how does that
apartment
all?
because I have a place to live right now and I don't have enough money to go pay for an apartment.
Yeah,
As far as job interview, like I said, I've been working. When I got out, my goal was to become a talk show host. So I've been working nonstop at learning the sort of the trade, how to book guests, where to find guests, how to send emails, that sort of thing. And then how to operate a microphone, and how to run a podcast, how to do an interview. So I've been working on mostly that stuff because that's what I want to do with my life. So I haven't been going out for job interviews, but I don't think I would have had a difficult job should I go out for interviews. I know other people who have done it, and there doesn't seem to be any real resistance to hiring ex-offenders.
and there are probably a lot of things you have to relearn. For example, I mean, you drove a car and now you spent all this year you never got to drive a car. Now you're
I
back in
did have to
school, you get to
relearn
drive a
that
car.
for sure. I failed the driving test 3 times before I finally passed it. So yes, that's something I had to
I bet that's
relearn.
kind of funny. Yeah, you go back and you see all these, and I can imagine all these teenagers saying, "What's this old man doing out here?" It's like, why are you taking the driver's test? Yeah, and you got. Does that how much? Also, maybe you haven't looked at it, but how would this impact your ability to travel? For example, if you want to go to Mexico or want to go to Canada, is that going to be a problem or
I
not?
think if I'm not mistaken, a lot of countries have bans from having convicted felons entering their countries.
Yeah,
So I'd imagine that would be tough, but there's probably some countries that don't mind it. I have no real plans on traveling out of the country anyways. I'm kind of a
yeah,
local kind of guy. I don't know. Not that I wouldn't want to. I would love to go to Rome, for instance, but I am pretty sure Italy's not taking me.
yeah.
So, Greece, Rome are places I would love to go visit. I'd love to see the Parthenon. I'd love to see the Colosseum. But I mean, if that's not in my future, that's not in my future. I'm happy to be free. And if I never leave my hometown, I think I'll be okay with it. Certainly beats a prison cell.
Yeah. What was the first thing you did once you got out? I mean, I assume you had your friend or somebody came and picked you up, and then you're out.
My friend picked me up, and we did a lot of things, but I've already talked about most of them. So I'll tell you something that I did that I haven't really mentioned. And he dropped me off in my old neighborhood, and I just said, just
Yeah,
drop me off. I just want to walk around the block. I grew up in a low income housing project in a suburb. So it's not, it's not like some project you'd see in Chicago where people are getting shot every minute, but it was a low income housing project. And I had him drop me off, and it was very nice to just walk around the block and just absorb what freedom was like, and to see my old neighborhood and what that's turned into. It was very nice experience. And that was, maybe a few hours after I had been released. That was excellent. I loved it. And to be honest, whenever I'm out
yeah.
now, if I'm in my old town, I make it a point to drive through there just to see my old neighborhood.
I can imagine that'd be such a shock to after you've been away that long to see a changed neighborhood, and then you probably went to some neighborhoods where it hadn't changed much at all.
Yeah, the thing that struck
Yeah,
me the most, and still does, about my old neighborhood is when I was a little kid, we were always outside. We'd be in the street playing football, in the backyard playing baseball, whatever, tag, hide and seek, or even just raising hell as kids, doing what we weren't supposed to be doing. But whenever I drive through, there's no kids outside. They're just not out. And I don't know if it's because they don't live there or because they're just all in the house on their phones or what. But that
yeah.
was a bit strange.
Yeah, I've wondered about it too, because sometimes when I walk by a bus stop and see kids, and I just see these kids, the kids are not acting the way we acted, and I don't know what's up with that. It's definitely
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah. I suppose when I was a
Yeah,
kid, the
so
adults looked at us and said, "Oh, these kids aren't like we were." I mean, that's, that, I guess that's the old man perspective. You always hear it. Oh, the kids nowadays, but that's a tale as old as history. The kids nowadays aren't like we were.
yeah, so one thing's true. So what's what where have you gotten involved? So you've already gotten involved with the Libertarian Party in Connecticut. Where else have you gotten
Yes.
involved since you got out? Yeah, I mean,
I was
well,
interviewed by
you're doing some
I was
radio
interviewed by
shows.
the
Okay.
Atlas Society. They
Oh
they
yeah,
did an interview with me. I was interviewed by Larry Sharp, and he's a libertarian out of New York. And I do a lot of time. I like
yeah,
to post stuff on Facebook, which I never thought I would do. I never wanted to get involved with social media, but
yeah,
once I got on there and I saw it was a good platform for sharing my ideas, for interacting, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff on there that I don't like, with the insults and just poor arguments, lack of logic. But there
oh
are
yeah.
also a lot of people that are very interested in ideas and interested in discussions, and I find that very interesting.
Michael, it's obviously I've been a little older, but I've been around since the '90s. And really, the various splits between Ayn Rand and the liberty movement, I find very troubling. I think both back in the '90s, I said both these movements need each other, and they still need each other, and they probably need each other even more now.
I
And
agree.
uh, I don't know. And incidentally, I didn't ask you how did one thing I forgot to ask you about too was what was prison life like during the times with the big bad virus. And you know how I feel. I talk
Yes,
about the big bad virus, the
it
pandemic. Yeah,
that was the hardest prison time I've ever done. I mean, because you don't know what's going to happen one day to the next. Got a couple guys test positive. Now you're on lockdown, and the way that the policies were implemented. Okay, everybody's got to wear a mask. Okay, fine, but then the correctional officers don't wear theirs. So you have a spectacle where we're getting
yeah,
reprimanded for not wearing a mask, whereas the correctional officers are walking around without wearing one. And I'm not making an argument for masks. What I'm saying is, if you're going to make it the policy, then make it the policy. Don't let them do
yeah,
what they want, but we're held to a different set of rules. Same thing with social distancing. I mean, they really didn't make us practice it. They didn't practice it. There were some comical
yeah,
examples. One time, for instance, when we were going to commissary and we could only go 5 or 10 at a time, so we could social distance in the hallway. Meanwhile, in the block, they got us stacked together like sardines, waiting to go out the door so that we can social distance. I mean, then this type of stuff happened over and over and over again for years. And a lot of guys in prison would say to me, "Oh, they're doing this stuff on purpose," and I would say, "I think you're giving them way too much credit." I ascribe to the maxim, I think it's of Napoleon, and never ascribe to malevolence that which can be explained by incompetence. And I firmly believe that. I don't think that they could have done such a good job of screwing up COVID if they really wanted to.
yeah. Would you say our prisoners probably aren't as good a help as the general public? Would that be fair to say, or not?
Um,
I mean,
it's
do they
hard to
tend to be
say.
do prisoners tend to be more overweight or less overweight? Do they have
I don't. It's tough to say. I mean, ultimately,
maybe?
there's guys that are in shape that like you wouldn't believe, and there's people that are out of shape
Yeah,
like you wouldn't believe. I think that the Department of Correction would serve themselves well if they would spend a little bit more money on good food, rather than serve the inmates crappy food and then have them buy all kinds of garbage on commissary, because what you're saving on the front end with the food, you're losing when you have to pay the medical bills of guys with diabetes or getting limbs amputated or heart surgery or
yeah,
whatever. Because the food, I mean, what they serve mostly are a lot of simple carbs, and on the commissary, they sell a lot of sugary items, or even those that are not very good for you.
yeah. That's quite unfortunate. I don't know. So you can't get a lot of vegetables or good meat in there. It sounds
No,
like to me they're just trying to do it cheap.
they do.
And
I think it's like
unfortunately,
less than $2
grains
a
are
day,
cheap.
I think.
Yeah.
But like I said,
Is it
is it what?
how I'm curious, that just made me think, how easy is it? Let's say your friend wants to bring you a piece of Domino's, can that be done or not?
No, you can't get anything like that brought in. No.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
there's plenty of COs that bring stuff in and give to inmates, but they're not supposed to. And no,
Yeah.
you're not. You can't have your friends and family do it either.
Yeah. Yeah. So they can't even. Yeah. And you probably, you probably never get to have a beer or anything like, or any alcohol while
No,
you're
hell
sitting there.
no, no,
No.
definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't. I suppose that's one stereotype that's true. The food probably isn't very good. I can
No, it's
imagine. But
horrendous. Now, guys can drink. I should say. I mean, there's homemade liquor in prison and plenty of it, but you're just not. You're not having somebody bring
yeah.
you a Michelob or a Bud
Yeah.
Light.
It's kind of interesting. It is kind of interesting just how industrious prisoners can be. I mean, oh, you put your own, you made your own still or something like that. Is that
Yeah,
correct? I mean,
yeah, inmates can be very resourceful. There's no doubt about it. And if that type of resourcefulness was actually directed in a productive fashion or to a productive endeavor, they could
yeah,
actually make something of themselves for sure.
yeah. Uh, do a lot? Do you get a lot of prisoners? Like where they might try to study to get a law degree or something like that, or is that encouraged or is that not encouraged? Or
I wouldn't say it's well, lately they've been encouraging education a little bit more than they were in the beginning of my sentence, but most inmates that really aren't interested in it. And if you're not going to, like I talked about earlier, if you're not going to have incentives to do so, where you're being rewarded
yeah,
for doing it and punished for not, you know, if a guy has a choice between watching Jerry Springer and slamming dominoes or reading Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, odds are he's slamming dominoes and watching Jerry Springer.
yeah, yeah. So I guess guys in prison play a lot of games. Like they might have a basketball
Yes.
court or play or
Basketball
or
games,
maybe
video
play
games,
cards.
cards, dominoes,
Yeah.
handball. Yes. A lot of escape
Are there?
mechanisms in prison for sure.
Yeah. Any games or anything that are particularly popular among prisoners? Anything that surprised you like that, or
I would say
sometimes the games people.
dominoes, poker, basketball, if I had to say the three most common, three most popular.
What do they play poker for? If they're
For money.
or are they just playing? Or they just play? Okay, I wasn't sure how much money they had, or maybe
Well,
maybe
you
they
have
just play poker
commissary.
for.
I mean,
Yeah.
so they play for commissary. And it's done in, plain
Oh, they
sight.
play
It's
for
not as if
food.
it's
Okay.
hidden. Yeah, and it's against the rules, but nobody enforces them, so you just do it all day.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do it all day, but a lot of guys do it all day. I have played poker, just not in quite some time.
I guess there probably is, but who knows? Some of those, my dad actually years ago would talk about going down to the West Virginia penitentiary, and they actually had a prison baseball team, and he claims one time that Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson actually came in and played the prison baseball team.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
maybe they
yeah.
did.
I mean, that was, yeah, I don't know how much you prison basketball team or prison, and I know when I lived in Ohio, there was actually a Toastmasters club inside the women's reformatory. Obviously, they couldn't compete in the contests, but they had a Toastmasters club, so which is something you could do in prison. Yeah. So what advice what advice do you have to people who are just getting out of prison? I mean, you've been out of 4 months. I mean, obviously, you're still probably not quite back to normal, but it's certainly been a long journey, I can imagine.
I don't know that I would have any advice for somebody getting out of prison. My advice would be for long before they got out of prison to, while they're in prison, to do what they can do to alter their thinking patterns, to develop a sound character and become a good human being that's capable of functioning in society. Because if they haven't done those things, by the time they're getting out, it's too late.
And you have all that time.
Yes.
Do prisoners have a lot of opportunities to exercise, or is it pretty much a
Sure. I
sedentary
mean,
place? I mean,
ultimately you can
can you go
exercise in
work
your
out, lift
room.
weights?
Oh, that depends on where you are, whether you can
Maybe
lift
maybe they
weights
can
or
go
not.
outside. Maybe you can go outside. I don't know if there's a place you can even go outside and run laps. I mean,
It all depends on what jail you're in, what block you're in. But I mean, if you want to exercise, you can exercise in your room. So there's always that. I used to
yeah.
exercise in my cell all the time.
what about opportunities just for prisoners to like learn, basic skills? I mean, for example, they could have them. They could bring in the police cars and teach the prisoners to work on cars, or
Well,
even
there's
maybe
there's
try to
plenty
teach
of
the prisoners to do basic
there's
plumbing or something like that.
yeah, there's plenty of classes that are voc ed classes, but again, they're
Yeah,
taught by unionized guys who, they come into the prison, they get a sure paycheck, and they're not really incentivized to do a good job. So you end up with guys like, I mean,
yeah,
people that run the wood shop or teach wood shop classes that know nothing about wood, that know nothing about building, but they have the job. So yes, in name they have it. What I often think about when I think about whatever the corrections does, when they describe it and it looks so good, and they have these mission statements and agency goals, and I just compare it to the menu. On the menu it says turkey a la king. Sounds great. I'll tell you, go eat it, and then you tell me how great it is. And if you do that and you understand the
oh,
analogy,
yeah.
you'll see just how screwed up the rest of corrections is.
Have you done any studies of prisons or corrections in other countries to see if they're doing anything differently,
Um, I
where
don't know
maybe
about
they have lower
studies.
rates?
I've certainly read about other countries, and
Yeah,
I think they do some things that are good. In Germany, for instance, to be a correctional officer, you have to, I think, do 2 years of training, and you got to get uh, educated in psychology and how to deal with people. I think that's all good stuff. They don't give out as extreme as sentences, which in some cases I think is good. In some cases, probably not. I don't think somebody
yeah,
that kills 70 kids or whatever the guy in Norway did should be, getting a 21-year sentence. Although it turns out that's not exactly accurate. But my point ultimately is I think America is too harsh in its sentencing practices. And I think that a lot of those countries are too lenient. Where the line is,
yeah,
that's a tough thing to say, but they are
yeah,
far more focused, it seems, over there on rehabilitation and actually changing offenders than they are on. And this is a misnomer. I just want to say this is that a lot of people say, well, America's prisons are focused on punishment. In my experience, that's not true. In my experience, they're based on incapacitation, that you basically just get a guy, you put him in a cell, leave him there, to do his thing for whatever his sentence is, and then you let him go. Punishment to me actually means something. It means implementing adverse sort of practices that are meant to disincentivize behaviors. There's none of
yeah,
that going on in prison. Being locked up, of course, is a punishment, but there's no real attempt to punish in order to
yeah,
deter and rehabilitate.
yeah. But it's you put these people in cages just so they hurt you, and that's about it.
Yes, you
It does
incapacitate
seem like
them.
to me I'm curious also, how is this has impacted your feelings of the death penalty for against it?
Prison has really nothing to do with my view on the death penalty. I'm opposed to it because I'm opposed to giving the government that type of power. I'm not somebody that
Okay,
generally trusts the government. I don't think they should have power. I think there's far too much chance that they're going to make a mistake and kill the wrong person. And I ultimately, just the idea that the government would strap somebody to a gurney, inject them with something, and then ship the body off, it just rubs me the wrong way. And I don't think
yeah,
that they should be engaged in such a policy.
yeah. Although there would be cases also where guys would either choose. I mean, if I'm
Sure.
facing life imprisonment with no way of getting out, I'd probably just say, well, I might as well go now. And I think there probably are some prisoners who would take that choice.
Sure.
But anyway, uh, what so what do you so what how well received have you been in the LP since you got involved? I mean, have you any flack from any of
Great.
your?
No, those guys, they welcomed, those guys and girls welcomed me in. They voted me in to be the spokesperson, and nobody gives me any flack or any criticism from that arena. It's been great.
Yeah. So what do you think about what's going on with the Libertarian Party right now? Since you
Uh,
got in after
Nationally or in the
all the
state of
things,
Connecticut?
nationally, state, or any states nearby. I know you're
Well,
not that far from New Hampshire. You're not that far from New York.
no,
or any of your impressions of the overall libertarian movement since you got
Yes,
out.
what I think is the libertarian movement is an easier thing to speak about than just the Libertarian Party. And what I think
Yeah,
is a lot of people that are libertarian oriented end up fighting with one another over minute issues. So you might arrive at the same conclusion policy wise, but by a different means. And I'm not saying that these differences aren't important, but ultimately, if you are advocating 99% of the same policy positions I'm advocating, then I don't see why we couldn't work together on those and then argue over the other 1% if we really wanted to. But there seems to be this thing like this, almost like a purity test where we all have to agree to the same thing or we're not going to do anything. And that's just, you're never going to get anything
yeah,
done that way. It's just not going to happen. And like you said earlier, I've always thought of objectivists until, well, I'm not going to say because I did read a lot about it in prison, but objectivist political theory is very
yes,
libertarian. It's a rights-based theory, small
yeah,
government, keep the government out of your
yes,
business. Taxation is, a form of initiation of force. So I wouldn't get into that type of thing where I think Ayn Rand was great. So therefore I can't associate with libertarians. If you just put the political theories there, you'd see they're very similar,
yeah,
although, arrived at from different perspectives. Because when you have a movement like a libertarian movement or a libertarian party, you're going to have different perspectives, different viewpoints. That's just the nature of what it is. And if you can't build a coalition, you're not accomplishing anything.
yeah. It seems like the most powerful coalitions are built around single issues, and you just focus on that single issue, and you just don't talk about all your differences. And a lot of single issue coalitions really get stuff done. To be okay, you a group like the Marijuana Policy Project, you get together and say, okay, we're going to work on getting marijuana legalized, and you just never talk about anything, and it's almost like there's this unwritten, unspoken agreement. We won't talk about anything else, you know. But that helps you get things done. Whereas a lot of times it becomes a debate club, and there are people out there who I definitely think are libertarian, ideologically, but they will not use that word at all because
No, and it's
mostly the
very
anarchists. I
strange.
mean,
What I found very strange is I've come across a significant amount of objectivists who will vote Republican, but hold an extreme amount of animosity toward libertarians. But the objectivist political theory is far closer to the libertarian
um,
ideology than it is to Republican ideology. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, they dislike
yeah, especially
the sort of anarchic wing of the Libertarian Party, but that's by no means a majority of the libertarian movement. So I don't know. I don't know whatever. I mean, it's people are who people are,
yeah,
I guess. And I hate that type of saying because it's such a redundancy and it doesn't really convey anything, but I don't know. Ultimately, I want to crack that. I want to bring different people together from different perspectives who want to achieve the same goal. And if we could get the government,
yeah,
shrunk down to a significant size, and then we have all these differences, well, then let's argue about it. But right now you have two major political parties who have combined, they've driven the debt up to $31 trillion. Nobody's opposing
oh
a
yeah,
federal minimum wage. In the states, they don't oppose the minimum wage. No one wants to do anything
yeah,
about monetary policy. The war on drugs is supported by both parties and is absolutely out of control. So why would I spend my time fighting with someone who's going to help me get rid of those things? I don't get it.
yeah. I don't get it either. Sometimes you just get into debate for how to do things. I mean, I remember you're at a meeting and we're getting into this heat discussion about which web page software to use, and it's like, oh, come on. It seems like the biggest arguments end up over the smallest things, but and also since that's one thing that's changed too since you just got out of prison. Have you went out and tried to buy even a small fraction of a Bitcoin yet?
No, but I have had quite a few people online try to sell me Bitcoin or get me involved in Bitcoin.
Oh yeah,
But I don't know enough about it to know if it's on the up and up or what. Not Bitcoin in of itself. I think it's fine. I'm talking about the people that are
yeah.
send me friend
Oh yeah.
requests. And then the next thing I know is they're saying, hey, have you
Oh
heard about
gosh. Oh
Bitcoin?
geez. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So I,
just just go out into Kraken or some place and, well, not financial advice, and just put in $20 and see what, and then just play around a little. The worst thing happens is you've lost $20, But I don't know how much we have right now. If you just got out of prison, you might be tight. So I forgot to ask this: what percentage of men in prison would you say were wrongfully convicted?
I couldn't guess at a percentage, but I would guess very few. Not that it doesn't happen, but
Okay.
I don't think it's very widespread. I mean, look, somebody goes to prison for something they didn't do. That's a travesty. I'm not trying to defend it. I just
Yeah.
don't think it's very many.
Yeah, but one other thing though too is it sounds like there's also a lot of do you think did most of these guys get their day in court, or did they just end up bargaining? Because
Oh, the vast
it
majority
seems like
plead guilty.
plea
The
bargaining has
vast
become this
majority.
way that it did not deny a man his day in court, because you say, well, if you plea bargain, we'll give you 5 years, but if you take the trial and you're convicted, we'll give you 20 years. And it's like,
That's exactly what happens. Yes.
that seems to be a very serious problem, because you're basically, I don't, I know Robert Ben Nato has written some stuff about abolishing plea bargaining, and saying it's just not doing any good anyway. But yeah, and people, you can even bargain out of, and if you want to, out of traffic tickets. I mean, you can, like I've heard people getting their speeding tickets changed to muffler violations and things like that. So they still pay a fine, but it doesn't get the insurance.
Yeah.
It sounds like, but I want, that's the kind of system I want, though. I would rather have guilty men walking than having innocent men in prison. I think that to me is the ultimate of libertarian, is that you prefer having 10 guilty men out than one innocent man in. But yeah.
Sure, I agree.
I'm glad to hear that, though, that it's not that you don't think it's that much.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Judging by the character traits, which is all I really can go by. I'm not reading all the cases. I've just met I don't think I've met anybody in prison that I didn't think should be in prison. Like, I was never like, oh my God, not once I got to know somebody. Even the guys I know that eventually were found to be innocent of the crime they were in prison for were probably doing other things. And that doesn't justify them being in prison. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that their character was such that they were already doing other illegal things also.
Yeah, well, that's one. Yeah, and that to me is one of the problems, though, too. And I remember specifically, during the Duke lacrosse thing back in 2006, and that's what some said. Well, whatever they did, it was bad enough. And another thing you often hear too, is when police officers shoot somebody, the conservatives will say, well, that guy probably had it coming anyway.
Yeah, that's stupid.
And maybe and there's a possibility that he did have it coming, but and unfortunately also I wonder if police officers have just maybe gotten a little overzealous, because, well, I'll spend all this time arresting this guy, but he's going to get a slap on the wrist anyhow. So that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, there's a lot of tough issues there. I think that a big problem is this war on drugs, because it puts police officers in these neighborhoods far more than they otherwise would be. It has them coming in contact with people far more than they otherwise would be. If we get rid of that idiotic war on drugs, I think we'd go a long way towards solving a lot of these problems.
Yeah. And as bad as it impacts America, I think it quite possibly has an even more profound impact on Mexico. And I love that country, but I honestly wonder what would happen to Mexico if the war on drugs in America was ended tomorrow, or some other countries, but definitely Mexico. Yeah,
sure. I think a lot of places would be a lot better off if we just stop this.
Yeah. If you could go back on your timeline sometime growing up, what would you, before you went to prison, what would you changed?
Nothing.
Nothing.
And there's, no, nothing. And the reason I say that is this: in order to really change my life trajectory, I would have to change a lot of things. So let's say that we go back in time and you just want to take away the main crime for which I was convicted. If you take that away, it's not as if my life was going to turn out well. The way that I was living, I was either going to end up committing murder or somebody was going to murder me. So you're not going to get a better result. So while I regret a lot of the things that I did, in the hypothetical to change something, it wouldn't really make a difference in the overall outcome. It might make a difference for individual people that I harmed, sure, and so they would, of course, would say, well, why wouldn't you change it? But then you would just end up replacing them with other victims. So I can't say there's any
True.
one thing that I would now. If somebody were to say to me, if you could change a big thing, well, I'd probably at a young age spend a lot more time in school than I would hanging around with the type of kids I was hanging around with, because that might actually change the overall trajectory. But to change one
Yeah.
minor thing or one action wouldn't do anything.
And how much do you think that affects kids? Just the crowds they happen to hang out with. I mean, they're hanging around
Um,
one crowd as opposed to others.
I don't think much. I mean, not, I shouldn't say that. What I think is that birds of a feather flock together. So
Yeah.
in my neighborhood, there were kids that were troublemakers and there were kids that weren't troublemakers. I gravitated toward the troublemakers. I didn't have to hang around with them. I wanted to, and they wanted to hang around with me. And as I got older, I gravitated toward more troublemakers and they gravitated toward me. So I don't like that whole, well, you were just with the wrong crowd. Well, I was with the wrong crowd for a reason. I was part of the wrong crowd.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Uh, what happened to your some of your partners in crime by the way?
The guys that I got arrested with,
Yeah.
one of them, only I had three guys that I got arrested with, and only one of them did time, and he did, I think, 10 years, and he got out and he ended up committing suicide. The other two, I really don't know much about.
Is that a fairly common problem where men get out of prison, they just can't adjust and they end up taking themselves out?
I don't think so. I don't think it's a common thing at all. I haven't looked into the numbers, so I might be wrong, but anecdotally, the people that I know, no, it's not a big problem.
What do you think the most successful people who what do the people who are most successful once they get out of prison, what have they done, and what do they usually end up doing? I mean, it's hard to get a job. Do you end up going in
I
business,
don't
or
think it's as hard to get a job as
maybe
one might think.
okay,
Most people that they get out, they get a
or
job
maybe
doing construction,
or they go into
whatever.
politicians,
Well, I don't know if they
become
become what you say,
politicians?
they become politicians. Yeah, I don't know about that, but
Yes.
they do become, they get a job, maybe a construction, maybe driving Uber, whatever. And they get jobs, they make it. If I had to put a characteristic on it, I think that they've actually changed their thinking. They've changed the way they look at themselves, the world, and other people. And they've done so in a pro-social manner that allows them to get out and interact properly with people in the world. That's, I mean, I haven't done studies on the people that are out, but I do know the type of programs in prison that lead to better results once guys get out, and all of them
Yeah.
focus on thinking patterns, the way you view the world, taking responsibility for your actions, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Is it true in some cases that prisons are just schools for criminals, and a lot of them just end up being more
I don't know about
or
that. So I suppose that exists to some extent, but I haven't
yeah,
really come across too much of it. I would, if I had a bet, I would say that's probably more the case in juvenile places than it is in adult
yeah,
prisons, but who knows?
yeah. I can only imagine what those are like. Yeah. Do you think it also happens too, though, that maybe some guys, when they're in prison, they end up, what was I lost train of thought here. So that that sometimes they just end up, because they might learn about, is it to say that some prisoners are there because they are smart enough to figure out how to get away with something?
Are people in
and
prison because they weren't smart enough to get away with things? Is that what you asked me?
Yeah. I mean, as opposed, I mean, would it be fair to say that maybe the smartest criminals aren't in prison at all because they know how to get caught?
I seriously doubt it. The law of probability catches up with everybody, and most
Yeah,
criminals get away with the vast majority of criminal acts they commit, but eventually
yeah,
it catches up with you.
yeah. That's true. So yeah. So do you guys are there what kind of organizations help prisoners adjust to life outside once they're out? Are there any organizations
Oh,
that do that? I mean, do you have
sure. I
meet
mean,
all?
I'm skeptical as to how effective they are, but there's halfway houses, there's reentry programs, drug programs, all sorts of things along those lines. Food stamps, the organizations that'll help you get jobs, help you find a place to live. There's
Yeah,
all a whole variety of those things. But
yeah,
my experience with corrections in general tells me that and with people I know that are involved in such programs, that they're usually not very effective. Doesn't mean that none of them are. I'm just saying that in my experience, and my conjecture would be that most aren't very good.
yeah, yeah. So where do you think you'll be in 5 or 10 years?
I think I'm going to be a very successful podcast host. That's my that's what I think. That's my plan.
Yeah. Do you have anything more you want to say about what's been going on with the LP currently, or maybe you just haven't been there long enough? I mean, who are people you really like in LP right now, or really admire, or anybody you really admire? And if you don't answer that, that's fine.
Honestly, I don't know many. I don't know much about the Libertarian Party in particular. I know quite a bit about the libertarian philosophy, objectivist philosophy, but the Libertarian Party, beyond knowing the sort of statement of principles and statement of policies, I don't know much to pass judgment on individuals. I know that it seems like an excellent vehicle to convey the liberty message, and that's why I'm there. And I want to grow the party here in the state and actually make us viable, because I think that the libertarian message is powerful. I think it's has integrity in the sense that there's not a whole lot of contradictory things involved in it. I think it works. I think it's right. And I think it makes sense. And I think a lot of people are more libertarian than what they actually know. And they just haven't been exposed to the
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah. What other books do you think are really good out there? Or books besides Ayn? We've mentioned Ayn Rand. I mean,
If
yeah,
I
you
would,
mentioned
if
some
I had to
back.
recommend two books to read outside of Ayn Rand that I think would help anybody to really understand the morality and effectiveness of liberty, I would recommend Frederick Bastiat's The Law and Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. I think those are two very simple books with very powerful messages and very crisp arguments.
Very easy. And Hazlitt's easy to read. Yeah, lots of easy stuff to
Yeah,
read. Yeah.
very much
And
so.
have you read all Brandon's books, or just the Psychology of Self-Esteem?
I've read quite a bit of Brandon's books. I haven't read them all. I've never read his biography or his autobiography. I really don't have any interest in reading it.
Yeah.
The Disowned Self I've never read, but most of them I've read, and most of them I found helpful. I mean,
Judge.
I don't. Yeah, Judgment Day I've never read, and I don't want to read it.
Yeah. What other books in objectivist circles have you read?
That are not by Ayn Rand?
Yeah, by Ayn Rand. Yeah. Yeah.
I've read Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. I've read Understanding Objectivism by Leonard Peikoff, Objective Communication by Leonard Peikoff, Ominous Parallels by Leonard Peikoff.
Yeah.
I read Viable Values by Tara Smith, The Virtuous Egoist by Tara Smith.
Yeah.
I guess Capitalism by George Reisman can kind of fit into that because he wasn't or is an objectivist.
Well, that's a humongous book. So yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that book's as far that book's. I mean, isn't that book even a lot longer than Atlas Shrugged? I mean,
yes,
I don't
quite
even
a
think
bit.
I've
Yeah,
seen that book. It was.
Yeah, that was an incredible slog of making it through that. What else have I read? So Truth and Toleration by Dave Kelly. I've read a bunch of essays.
I read Truth.
And I read like I said, the philosophic thought of Ayn Rand, and I've read a lot of critiques, but none of them I find very effective. Goddess of the Market. I read Ayn Rand and the World She Made. I read a book in prison called Why Ayn Rand is Wrong and Why It Matters, and a lot of them completely misrepresent her views or just attack her personally. There's not really a solid. Accurate critique of her view. Oh, Chris Matthew Ciabara's The Russian Radical. I thought that was a pretty good work.
Oh yeah. This is the thing I don't get. It seems like people cannot engage in political debate anymore without misrepresenting the people they're debating, and I just don't understand what's up with that anymore. And to me, that creates a lot of. That's where I really get mad at people, at libertarians or objectivists, is when they misrepresent these people. And we had a controversy last November where somebody, said 3 words and people took those words completely out of context. But it's just like, because they heard those 3 words, it's definitely an issue out there.
For sure.
Well, it sounds like you're doing pretty well. I'm sorry. You definitely still look a lot younger than you are. I don't know if prison, keeps you young or whatever.
That's what they say. They say prison preserves you. I don't know how true it is. I also just shaved, so it might be the boyish look because I have no scruff. I don't know.
Did anybody cut you off because of this whole experience? I mean, literally just say, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I mean, I don't know what kind of relationships you with your family or your friends.
Nobody that's known me. It's happened on social people. It has happened on social media where people have found out about my past and cut me off. It's rare, but it has happened. But as far as people that knew me before I went into prison, no, nobody's cut me off.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's
I know of. I mean, I haven't come across every single person I ever knew either. So there are people out there who may not want to talk to me, but my friends in general, the people that I was close with, no one has cut me off.
Yeah, and maybe of course it almost, and maybe some of them. I mean, there are some people, that ended up in jail. I remember thinking at school, well, that doesn't surprise me much, but unfortunately, when I read in Richard Branson's book, apparently when he graduated from one of his schools, and the headmaster said to him or something like, "Congratulations, I predict you will either go to prison or become a millionaire." That Richard Branson almost did go to prison. Certainly ended up making a lot of money. So it's a good story. But yeah. So, do you have anything else you want to say for us before we go?
The only thing I'd like for people to check out my podcast, The Rational Egoist. It's available on YouTube or on Spotify and Apple. I'd like to thank for having me on the show. So I love these type of discussions. I love discussions that are rooted in reason and not emotionalism and insult slinging. Yeah,
well, part of the reason I said I just want to have people on here that are interested in ideas.
Yes.
Certainly follow, subscribe, hit like on the video, and since we're on several sites now, and of course, go by my Knowledge Escape from the Village, and I'm Chris Baker. This is, and also I want to promote the Monerotopia conference, which is up in Mexico City in 4 weeks. Go to monerotopia.com. It's May 5th, 6th, and 7th. So you can get your tickets. But yes, thank you for coming on, Michael, and we are out.
Thank you.